Elon Musk and Russia's insane partnership will change everything. What would happen if two friends who compete with each other all the time suddenly started becoming friends? Wouldn't that be surprising? Well, as you might have guessed, we're talking about the American space company SpaceX and Russia. We all know that Russia was always a competitor of America, but now things are a little bit changed now. The Russian space agency partnered with SpaceX and NASA for a collaborated mission. Sounds nice, right? Like two space giants are finally making something together. Well, it's not what you think. Then what is it? Well, give the video a thumbs up and stay tuned to find out what it really is. Hello everyone, welcome to Genius's Guide, your daily dose of geniusness. And today we're going to talk about Elon Musk's terrifying plan for Mars. So without wasting any time, let's get into it from the beginning. After the Russian military blew up an old satellite with an anti-satellite missile last month, American officials responded angrily, warning that thousands of tiny pieces of new debris could endanger astronauts in space. Dmitry Rogozin, the head of Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, seemed to share some of that frustration. Rogozin, who initially downplayed the threat of debris, said in a recent interview, "No, I don't like it." He added, "There's a lot of debris scattered across the orbit." Despite the waning danger to the astronauts of the space station, the diplomatic impact of Russia's military action in orbit is far from insignificant. A weapon test on November 15 brought two aspects of bilateral ties between the US and Russia together. On the one hand, bravado and provocations that mark out their testy military relationship. On the other, NASA-Russian relations that have long endured. For more than 2 decades, the space station has been a symbol of diplomatic triumph between the US and Russia. Typically insulated from the international tensions on Earth, Russian astronauts have traveled into orbit on the space shuttle for nearly a decade. And when it ceased its flights, the Russian Soyuz spacecraft has become NASA's only means of travel into orbit for about the same period. For the station to work, both space powers have to work together. The Russian segment relies on American solar panels for electricity, and the station as a whole uses Russian gear for orbit control. However, the anti-satellite test and tensions between the US and Russia over Ukraine and other issues are complicating the decades-old friendship between NASA and Roscosmos. As the two agencies work to get an agreement that will support their relationship for years to come, they find that orbital affairs are linked to conflicts on the ground. Now, years have passed since the agreements were drafted. One would let Russian astronauts fly on SpaceX's Crew Dragon capsule to the space station, in exchange for American seats on Russia's Soyuz. In the second case, the NASA-Roscosmos Space Station alliance would be brought to a close through 2030. It is expected that both agreements will require the approval of White House officials, whose primary concern is diffusing a potential military conflict with Russia over the situation in Ukraine. Moreover, they must also pass through the US State Department, where officials are considering ways to prevent Russia from launching anti-satellite missiles in the future. Increasingly, agreements to further space cooperation are becoming entangled with reactions to other issues that are taking place. Mr. Rogozin, who attended the meeting, said that he hoped the project would not become politicized, but you can never be sure. Mr. Rogozin seemed to be acknowledging the fact that the future of the relationship between the nations lies in the hands of their leaders. He said, "In the sense of getting this program approved, Roscosmos has full trust in the Russian president and the Russian government." Rogozin, a former deputy prime minister and chief of Russia's arms industry, knows how fractious the US-Russia relationship can be. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea. The US sanctioned him personally. As a result, he isn't allowed to enter the United States and can't meet with his American counterparts. Former Senator Bill Nelson, who served as NASA administrator under President Biden, called Russia's missile test pitiful. Later, when talking with Mr. Rogozin, he softened his tone, expressing concern about the new cloud of space debris, but assuming his counterpart didn't know in advance that Russia would launch its anti-satellite test. Nelson said in an interview that Rogozin seems caught between a rock and a hard place because he can only say so much about the weapon test. He said, "He's had to be quite demure, which I understand completely." Bob Cabana, NASA's associate administrator, flew to Moscow the day before the missile test for face-to-face talks with Russian officials. A few days after the test, and over dinner with Mr. Rogozin, they decided to lock in an agreement to barter astronaut flights and extend the space station partnership until 2030. Mr. Cabana, who was sent to Moscow for the talks partly because he is well known to Russian space officials, he said, "We have an intent to do both of those. We didn't sign any agreements, but it was a very productive discussion. Rogozin didn't tell NASA when the test was coming, as he explained in the recent interview. The Ministry of Defense didn't consult Roscosmos beforehand, because the Russian military had its own missile tracking capabilities to determine whether the attack would endanger the space station. But he added, "I'm not going to tell you everything I know." As tensions over the weapon test loom, Mr. Rogozin announced earlier this month that Anna Kikina, the only woman in Russia's astronaut corps, would be the first Russian to fly in SpaceX's Crew Dragon capsule next fall. According to him, he'll fly at least one integrated crew a year, from 2022 to 2024 under the new deal. While the negotiations continue, Ms. Kikina and others have already visited US sites for training. Ultimately though, Mr. Rogozin said Roscosmos couldn't agree to a Russian extension unless the US lifted sanctions on 2 Russian companies that were blacklisted last year because of suspected military ties. According to him, the sanctions stop Russia from building parts for the space station to last until 2030. Mr. Rogozin said, "There really is no politics behind what I'm saying. In order to give us the technical capability to produce whatever is needed for this extension, these restrictions need to be lifted first." NASA's Nelson says he's talked to the White House about swapping seats with the Russians and extending the space station. Despite the anti-satellite test and other geopolitical tensions in the spotlight, he stated that little progress had been made in getting the deals approved. "All of this is to be determined," he said. NASA has agreed to swap astronauts, but it hasn't yet been approved by the State Department, which is deciding how to respond to Russia's missile test. A State Department spokesman says, "We do not preview our response options." But he quotes Kathleen Hicks, the Deputy Defense Secretary, who said this month, "We would like to see all nations agree to refrain from anti-satellite weapons testing that creates debris." Those officials, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss tentative plans, said that might mean putting an end to destructive anti-satellite weapons testing, perhaps during the Geneva Disarmament Conference this year, rather than inserting anti-satellite weapon-related language into NASA's agreements with Russia. Rogozin said he didn't think Russia would conduct another anti-satellite test. Whether there will be other tests of a similar kind? More likely no rather than yes, he said. But even if the anti-satellite weapon irritant fades, NASA and Roscosmos' alliance has been gradually scaled back, with the relationship now focused primarily on the space station. The US saw the space station in the 90s and 2000s as a way to reach out to Russia and establish new relationships post-Cold War, and to keep their aerospace industry working on good things for countries like Iran and North Korea, according to Brian Whedon, a think tank analyst. But conditions have changed since then. When SpaceX's Crew Dragon started flying Americans to space in 2020, NASA stopped paying Russia up to $90 million per astronaut seat on Russia's Soyuz capsule, ending a key revenue stream for the Russian space agency after being ordered by Congress to wean the US space industry off of Russia. An American rocket company stopped buying Russian rocket engines, eliminating another source of income. And Russia isn't one of the allies working with NASA to send astronauts back to the moon in the next decade. It's partnered with China instead. Whedon explained that the extension of cooperation on the space station would likely signal the end of the US-Russian civil relationship in space. NASA wants to stimulate the market for privately built orbital research outposts that might eventually replace the space station, a move that could break up one of the last ties that bind the two entities. Nevertheless, this deal holds a lot of surprises, and that's definitely going to change the upcoming future of not only the American space industry, but also Russia's. Anyway, what do you think about this? Tell us in the comments, and make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for us to provide you with more must-know developments in finance and technology. We'll see you in the next one. Until then, stay safe.